Dear God, thank you for this day you've given us. We pray that you will guide us through this lesson and help us learn your word and be able to implement it into our lives daily. For Jesus' name, amen.
Turn to hymn number 242. 242. There we go. Announcements for today and throughout the week. Next Sunday, regular hours of service, Sunday school at 9, worship service at 10. There'll be a work day on the 27th, that's the Saturday before that. We have a June camp out, June 23rd through 25th. Iowa Conference is July 26th through 30th, and Illinois Family Camp is August 23rd through 25th. Are there any other announcements we need to make at this point?
We'll probably take the food the second week in June.
Okay, food goes second week in June.
And I was wondering if anybody would volunteer to really try to get some interest for Illinois people coming to the camp out, and anybody else? Anybody want to do that?
Okay.
We should type up an invitation and have them put it on the bulletin board.
Yeah, that would be fine.
If there are any more
Yeah.
announcements, let's turn to hymn number 279. Let's stand as we sing our main standing for prayer following.
Jesus,
forgive us our many sins, and finally receive us in your kingdom. In Jesus' name. Amen. Anybody remember what happened last Sunday?
It was Mother's Day.
No. Well, this happened after the service. We're walking out to the cars,
That was 2 Sundays ago.
and Kenneth
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, go ahead, yes.
Kenneth collapsed because his foot cramped on him. Well, that reminded me of something. Has anybody ever heard of Mephibosheth?
Yep.
For 2 Samuel 2, verse 4. We're going to be studying a lot on 2 Samuel today, so turn to 2 Samuel chapter 2. Chapter 4, verse 4.
What chapter?
Chapter 4, verse 4.
Oh, you're right.
2 Samuel, that's why I got the 2 mixed up here, 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel 4:4. And Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son that was lame on his feet, or of his feet. He was 5 years old when the tidings came of Saul and Jonathan out of Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled. And it came to pass, as she made her haste to flee, that he fell and became lame. His name was Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth was Jonathan's son, and Jonathan was Saul's son. So this is Saul's grandson. Now, let's talk about David here. 2 Samuel 5. We're going to go through this kind of quickly here. But David is anointed king of Israel. I got 1 through 5, but verses 4 and 5. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem he reigned 30 years and 3 years over all Israel and Judah. So David is made king. Now let's go to 2 Samuel 17 through 19. But when the Philistines heard that they had anointed David king over Israel, all the Philistines came up to seek David, and David heard of it and went down to the hole. The Philistines also came down and spread themselves out in the valley of Rephaim. And David inquired of the Lord. That's important. David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go up to the Philistines? Wilt thou deliver them into mine hand? And the Lord said unto David, Go up, for I will doubtless deliver the Philistines into thine hand. So, David's made king. He defeats the Philistines. Let's go to 2 Samuel 6, 1 through 3. Now, before this, remember, the Philistines had captured the Ark of the Covenant. They had nothing but problems with it, and they wanted to give it back, or they gave it to somebody, and they left it. And 2 Samuel 6, 1 through 3. Again, David gathered together with all the chosen men of Israel 30,000. And David arose and went with all the people that were with him from Baal of Judah to bring up from thence the ark of God, whose name is called by the name of the Lord of hosts that dwells between the cherubim. And they set the ark of God upon a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab that was in Gibeah. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drove the new cart. Now what is the problem with that story there at the start? They put the Ark of the Covenant on a cart, and it was designed to have poles through this thing and put on the shoulders of people and carried that way. And they put it on a cart. Okay? So they're carried on a cart. Now let's go to verses 6 and 7 of the same chapter. When they came to Nachon's threshing floor, Uzzah put forth his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen shook it. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God smote him there for all his error, and there he died by the ark of God. So, David's anointed king, David defeats the Philistines, David brought the ark back to Jerusalem, but he doesn't quite get there, and Uzzah is killed. Because, why? He touched the ark. Well, after this, then David left it. He didn't want anything to do with it. And 3 months later, I think it was, he came back, and he goes, you know what? I think we should carry it like we're supposed to. And he put the staves through it and picked it up and carried it back to Jerusalem. Now let's look at 2 Samuel 6, verse 16. As the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, looked through a window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. Now who was Michal? Remember? That was David's first wife. And then Saul took her away and gave her to somebody else. And we'll see later on, she had kids with that other person. But then she came back. David said, I want her back. Got her back. And she despised him because he was dancing before the Lord. Well, let's look at 20 through 23. Then David returned to bless his household. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, I can just hear this. Oh, how glorious it was for the king of Israel today, who uncovered himself in the eyes of the handmaids of the servants, as one of the vain fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. In other words, she's tormenting him and saying, why did you uncover it? Because all he had on was a linen cloth. And he was dancing and praising God. And David said unto Michal, it was before the Lord, which chose me before thy father, and all before his house, to appoint me ruler over the people of the Lord, over Israel. Therefore I will play before the Lord. And I will yet be more vile than thus, and will be based in mine own sight, and of the maidservants which thou hast spoken of them shall I be had in honor. Therefore Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child until the day of her death. So after that she was barren. She was David's wife, but she had no children. Now, children were a blessing to the people, and we talked about this before a few weeks ago, maybe several weeks ago, I'm not sure, but Michal didn't have any children, and that was a shame to her. That's why the women were crying so much, why Sarah wanted a child of her own. Who was that? Who was the mother of Samuel?
Hannah.
Hannah wanted a child of her own. Who's another person? Elizabeth wanted a child of her own. That's John's mother. So anyway, now let's go to 2 Samuel 7, and let's read 12 through 16. This is a covenant that God made with David. Okay? So 12 through 16. When thy days be fulfilled, and thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, I will set up thy seed after thee, which shall proceed out of thy bowels, and I will establish his kingdom. In other words, he's telling David, when you die, I'm going to set up your son to be king. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. And I will be his father, and he shall be my son. If he commit iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men and with the stripes of the children of men. But my mercy shall not depart away from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away before thee. And thine house and all thy kingdom shall be established forever before thee. Thy throne shall be established forever. Now, we talk about that. Is the throne of David, or the promise of somebody sitting on the David throne, ever gone away? No, it hasn't. If you want to know more about that, you read the life of Jesus. All right, let's go to 2 Samuel 8. Verses 1 and 14. I put 1 through 14, but I didn't want to read all of those. 2 Samuel 8, verse 1. And after this it came to pass that David smote the Philistines and subdued them, and David took Mephibosheth out of the hand of the Philistines. So, David smites the Philistines. And let's go to verse 14. And he put garrisons in Edom, throughout all Edom, put he garrisons, and they all of Edom became David's servants, and the Lord preserved David whithersoever he went. David was doing what God wanted him to, and he was continually fighting. He was doing what he was supposed to do, but he was continually fighting. Now let's look up 2 Samuel 9. Let's read verse 3, 6, 7, and 13. I put 1 through 13, but I don't really want to read all of those. But anyway, 2 Samuel 9, 3. And the king said, Is there not yet any of the house of Saul that I may show kindness of God unto him? And Ziba said unto the king, Jonathan hath yet a son, which is lame on his feet. Oh, so this is where Mephibosheth comes back in, see? Now let's go to 6 and 7. Now when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, was come unto David, he fell on his face and did reverence. And David said, Mephibosheth? And he answered, Behold thy servant. And David said unto him, Fear not, for I will surely show thee kindness for Jonathan thy father's sake, and will restore thee and all the land of Saul thy father, and thou shalt eat bread at my table continually. So isn't that interesting? Now let's go to verse 13. So Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, for he did eat continually at the king's table, and was lame on both his feet. So this is the same Mephibosheth we talked about at the beginning. So why did David show kindness to him? Why did David basically make him a friend? Because he was great friends with Jonathan, Mephibosheth's father. And Jonathan died with his father, Saul, in a big battle. And David really mourned for that. And then he was made king, and all these things happened. And he said, I remember there's got to be somebody out there that I can praise, because Jonathan was such a good friend of mine. And he found Mephibosheth. And he told him, You're going to eat at my table from now on. That's all there is to it. So let's go on to 2 Samuel 10. I put down here once again 1 through 19, but we're going to read verse 8, 13, and 18. So 2 Samuel 10, 8. And the children of Ammon came out and put the battle in array at the entering of the gate, and the Syrians of Zobah and the Rehob and Ishtab and Makkah were by themselves in the field. So all these people were come together. Now let's go to 13. And Joab drew nigh, and the people that were with him unto the battle against the Syrians, and they fled before him. Now let's go to verse 18. And the Syrians fled before Israel, and David slew the men of 700 chariots of the Syrians and 40,000 horsemen, and smote Shobach, the captain of the host, who died there. In other words, David defeated everybody that came up against him. I think that's just so interesting to know that if the leader is following God and doing what God tells him to do. What happened with Saul? Saul made a mistake, and did the nation win that battle? No, they didn't, because he made a mistake in the last battle. He didn't kill everybody like he was told to. He didn't kill all the animals like he was told to. Now we go to 2 Samuel 11. Now, you all know about Bathsheba and David, right? Well, that's the entire chapter, 1 through 27. But we're going to look at verses 2 through 5 and verse 27. And it came to pass in the evening tide that David arose from off his bed and walked upon the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman washing herself, and the woman was very beautiful to look upon. And David sent and inquired after the woman, and one said, Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? And David sent messengers and took her, and she came in unto him, and he lay with her, for she was purified from her uncleanness, and she returned unto her house. And the woman conceived and sent and told David, and said, I am with child. So David's in a fix. And what's he do? Well, he gets her husband to come back. And he begs the husband basically, go home, sleep with your wife. Have a nice time. Because then maybe he can hide this and everybody would think that that's Uriah's child instead of his. And Uriah didn't do it. Didn't do it. So finally, this is what's interesting to me is there was a note given to Uriah to give to Joab of the battlefront. And that was basically Uriah's death warrant. You take him to the hottest part of the battle, and at a certain time everybody withdraw from him so he's slain by the enemy. And David might as well picked up a sword and killed him himself. That was not a good thing to do. Well, anyway, down to verse 27 here. I'm sorry. Let's see. Okay, David and Bathsheba, verse 27, yeah. When the morning was past, after he found out Uriah was dead, the morning was past, David sent and fetched her to his house, and she became his wife and bare him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. So now let's go to 2 Samuel 12. I put 1 through 14, but we're going to read 9, 10, 12, and 14. So, 2 Samuel 12, verse 9. Wherefore hast thou despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in his sight? Thou hast killed Uriah the Hittite with a sword. Thou hast taken his wife to be thy wife. Thou hast slain him with the sword of the children of Ammon. Isn't that interesting? This is the prophet Nathan talking to David and telling him, you didn't do right here. Now, therefore, the sword shall never depart from thine house, because thou hast despised me, and thou hast taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be thy wife. Now let's go down to verse 12. For thou didst it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun. In other words, I'm going to punish you. You try to do this in secret, and I'm going to punish you so everybody sees and knows what happened. Well, what happened? Well, let's look at verse 14. Howbeit, because this deed thou hast given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme the child also that is born of thee shall surely die. So, the child is going to die. Now, the child dies. Let's look at 2 Samuel 12, 15 and 23. I'm going to read verses 18 and 19. And it came to pass, on the 7th day that the child died, and the servants of David feared to tell him that the child was dead, for they had said, Behold, while the child was yet alive, we spake unto him, and he would not hearken unto our voice. How will he then vex himself if we tell him that the child is dead? But when David saw that his servants whispered, David perceived that the child was dead. Therefore David said unto the servants, Is the child dead? And they said, He's dead. Well, so then what did David do? He got up, he cleaned himself up, and he ate. He hadn't been eating anything. He was praying and trying to convince God to not kill his son, and it happened anyway. And after that, he thought, well, there's nothing more I can do. So he got up and went on. Now, David's child dies. Now we have the birth of Solomon. 2 Samuel 12, 24 and 25. And David comforted Bathsheba his wife, and went in unto her, and lay with her, and she bare a son, and called his name Solomon, and the Lord loved him. And he sent by the hand of Nathan the prophet, and he called his name Jedediah, because of the Lord. So Solomon is born. Now, 2 Samuel 13, we have a story here of half-brother and half-sister. They're both daughters of David. Sons and daughters of David. They both have the same father, but different mothers. Verse 1. Verse 1. And it came to pass after this that Absalom, the son of David, had a fair sister, whose name was Tamar, and Ammon, the son of David, loved her. So he fell in love with his own sister. I'll say at verse 11. And when she had brought them unto him to eat, he took hold of her and said unto her, Come lie with me, my sister. Well, that's not a good thing. Verses 14 and 15. She's telling him, no, this isn't right. We shouldn't do this. So in verse 14, howbeit he would not hearken unto her voice, but being stronger than she, forced her and lay with her. Then Ammon hated her exceedingly, so the hatred where he hated her was greater than the love where he had loved her. And Ammon said unto her, Arise, be gone. So Ammon had incest with his sister. Now we go to verse 22. Absalom, remember, is a total brother of Tamar, the sister here. And Absalom spake unto his brother Ammon, neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Ammon, because he had forced his sister Tamar. So Absalom hates Amnon for doing what he did. So what's he do? Well, let's look at 23 through 33. I'm going to read verses 28 and 29. Now Absalom had commanded his servant, saying, Mark ye now, when Ammon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say unto you, Smite Ammon, then kill him. Fear not, have I not commanded you, be courageous and be valiant. And the servants of Absalom did unto Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and every man gat him upon his mule and fled. So they thought Absalom was going to kill all the sons, and they were all scared and they ran, but Absalom had a reason. He was not very happy with Amnon for raping his sister. Well then, 34 through 39, I'm going to read verse 34 and 38. But Absalom fled, and the young man that kept the watch lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there came much people by the way of the hillside behind him. And in verse 38, so Absalom fled and went to Geshur, and was there 3 years. So Absalom flees to Geshur because he didn't want David to get mad at him and slay him. Well then, Absalom returns to Jerusalem. This is chapter 14, verses 1 through 33, and we're going to read 21, 23, and 24. Now, to start out with, Absalom had a friend who was very wise and kind of wily, and he told this woman to go tell a story to the king and all this stuff to try to get Absalom to come back, or be able to come back. And after a while, the king repented. So let's look at verse 21. And the king said unto Joab, Behold, now I have done this thing. Go therefore, bring the young man Absalom again. So he brings Absalom home. And 23 and 24. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, let him turn to his own house, and let him not see my face. So Absalom returned to his own house and saw not the king's face. In other words, you can come back, but I don't want to see you. I seriously, very angry with you for what you've done. And I don't blame David for that. So, all these things are going on in David's life. Let's remember that, okay? Let's go to 2 Samuel 15. 1 through 12, I'm going to read 4 through 6, and then verse 10. So 2 Samuel 15, verse 4. And Absalom said, moreover, oh, that I were made judge in the land, that every man which hath any suit or cause might come unto me, and I would do him justice. In other words, this is a conspiracy that Absalom had. He was trying to win the hearts of people. And it was so, when any man came nigh unto him to do him obeisance, he put forth his hand, took him, and kissed him. On this manner did Absalom to all Israel it came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So this is his conspiracy. He's going to steal the hearts of people that have problems. All deal with it. Now let's go down to verse 10. But Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, as soon as he hear the sound of the trumpet, then he shall say, Absalom reigneth in Hebron. So Absalom was conspiring to take the kingship from David. And David was kind of blinded to this, didn't know. So let's look at 2 Samuel 13 to 37, but we're going to look at verses 13 and 14. David flees Jerusalem. There came a messenger to David, saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are after Absalom. And David said unto his servants that were with him at Jerusalem, arise and let us flee, for we shall not escape from Absalom. Make speed to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly, and bring evil upon us, and smite the city with the edge of the sword. So David leaves. Now, remember Ziba? Ziba was the servant of Mephibosheth. So David runs away, and let's look at chapter 16, verses 1 through 4. And when David was a little past the top of the hill, behold, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met him, with a couple of asses saddled, and upon them were 200 loaves of bread, and 100 bunches of raisins, and 100 summer fruits, and a bottle of wine. The king said unto Ziba, what meanest thou by these? And Ziba said, the asses be for the king's household to ride on, and the bread and summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine that such as be faint in the wilderness may drink. And the king said, and where is thy master's son? And Ziba said unto the king, behold, he abideth at Jerusalem. For he said, today shall the house of Israel restore me to the kingdom of my father. So, this is kind of interesting that Ziba is basically lying to David here. But we'll see that here. And the king said to Ziba, behold, thine are all that pertains unto Mephibosheth. And Ziba said, I humbly beseech thee that thou might find grace in thy sight, O Lord, my Lord, O king. So, Ziba is kind of going behind Mephibosheth's back here. Well, so David's gone, and let's look at Absalom entering Jerusalem. 2 Samuel 16, 15 to 23, and I'm going to read verse 15. And Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel with him. Ahithophel. Boy, I'm not sure. Anyway, that name went with him. So let's look at 2 Samuel 17 now. (1 through 29), but verses 15 and 16. And Hushai, unto Zadok and Abiathar the priests, thus did Ahithophel counsel Absalom and elders of Israel, and thus have I counseled. Now therefore send quickly and tell David, saying, lodge not this night in the plains of the village or the wilderness, but speedily pass over, lest the king be swallowed up and all the people that are with him. In other words, Absalom was going to send people out to get David, and Hushai told people to go tell David that the king's coming toward you. You gotta hide. You gotta do something. And this, I read all the stories, and this is really interesting to read, to understand all these things that went in and out, and all the things that happened here. But we're going to go to 2 Samuel 18 now. And read verses 9 and 14 and 15. So 18:9. And Absalom met the servants of David, and Absalom rode upon a mule, and the mule went under the thick boughs of a great oak, and his head caught hold of the oak, and he was taken up between the heaven and the earth, and the mule that was under him went away. In other words, Absalom had a big bush of hair, and it got hung up in the tree limbs, and the mule kept walking, and he was hanging there, helpless by his hair. And somebody came up and told Joab, and this wasn't good, because David had said, I want that man back here alive. I don't want him harmed. He's my son, I don't want him harmed. And what did Joab do? Well, let's look at verse 14 and 15 here. Then said Joab, I may not tarry thus with thee. And he took 3 darts in his hand and thrust them through the heart of Absalom while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. And 10 young men that bare Joab's army compassed about and smote Absalom and slew him. So, Joab basically killed Absalom. Well, what happened to David? Well, let's look at 2 Samuel 18, 31 through 33. And behold, Hushai came, and Hushai said, tidings, my lord the king, for the Lord hath avenged thee this day of all them that rose up against thee. And the king said unto Hushai, is the young man Absalom safe? And Hushai answered, the enemies of my lord the king, and all that rise against thee, to do thee hurt, be as that young man is. In other words, Absalom's dead. And the king was much moved, and went up to the chamber over the gate, and wept. And when he said, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would God I had died for thee, O Absalom, my son, my son. So David was quite shook up because of this. Well, let's look at 2 Samuel 19, verse 15. So the king returned and came to Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal to meet the king and to vex the king over Jordan. Now, this is David returning to Jerusalem. And let's look what happens next in verses 22 and 23. And David said, what have I to do with ye, sons of Zeruiah, or whatever, that ye should this day be adversaries unto me? Shall there be any man put to death this day in Israel? For do not I know that I am king this day over Israel? Therefore the king said unto Shimei, thou shalt not die, and the king sware unto him. So the king said, you're not going to die. He's pardoning his enemies. Well, now let's look what happened to Mephibosheth here, because remember back not too long ago, Ziba lied to David and said, Mephibosheth stayed behind because his family is going to be king again. He must be there. And this wasn't true. Well, let's look at 2 Samuel 19:24 through 30. I'm gonna read verses 26 and 27. Because verse 25 said, "Why didn't you come with me when I ran, Mephibosheth?" Well, let's read verse 26. And he answered, "My lord, O king, my servant deceived me. For thy servant said, I will saddle me an ass, that I may ride thereon and go to the king, because thy servant is lame. And he has slandered thy servant unto the Lord my king, but my lord the king was an angel of God, therefore do whatever is good in thine eyes." In other words, Ziba lied to me. He told me he was going to go saddle up an ass and bring it to me, and he took it and left me here. Well, see, all this time, let's go back to verse 24 and read this. "And Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king, and neither dressed his feet, nor trimmed his beard, nor washed his clothes, from the day the king departed until the day he came again in peace." So in other words, that was Mephibosheth saying, I'm waiting for the king to come back, for David. And I'm not going to trim my beard, I'm not going to wash my clothes, I'm not going to change my dressing of my feet or anything. And I think David saw this, and he pardoned Mephibosheth also. Well, let's go to 2 Samuel 21. Verses 1, 3, and 5, and 6. David avenges the Gibeonites. Now, Gibeonites were people that Saul wanted to kill, and it just didn't happen. But anyway, 2 Samuel 21:1. "And there was a famine in the days of David, 3 years, year after year. And David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered, It is for Saul and for his bloody house, because he slew the Gibeonites." So this is why the country had a famine. And David said, well, what can I do about this? Well, let's look at verse 3. "Wherefore David said unto the Gibeonites, What shall I do for you, and wherewith shall I make atonement for that you may bless the inheritance of the Lord?" All right, let's read verse 5. "They answered the king, The man that consumed us and that devised against us that we should be destroyed from remaining in the coast of Israel, let 7 men of his sons be delivered unto us, and we will hang them up unto the Lord in the Gibeah of Saul, whom the Lord did choose. And the king said, I will give them." So, in other words, 7 men that are relative to Saul are to be hung, because this drought would go away then. And David says, take it. Well, let's look at 7 through 9 now. "But the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because the Lord's oath was between them, because David and Jonathan, the son of Saul. But the king took 2 sons of Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah, whom she bare unto Saul, Armani and Mephibosheth, and the 5 sons of Michal, the daughter of Saul, whom she brought up for Idril, the son of Barzillai, the Messiahite. And he delivered them unto the hands of the Gibeonites, and they hanged them in the hill before the Lord, and they fell all 7 together, and were put to the death in the days of harvest, in the first days, the beginning of barley harvest." So, David spares Mephibosheth. Now, the whole reason for that story is to say, look at all the things that happened to David. All right, he was appointed king over Israel. He defeats the Philistines. He brings the ark. Uzzah dies. David's ridiculed by Michal. The Lord makes a covenant with him. David has a lot of victories. He shows kindness to Mephibosheth. He defeats Syria and Ammon. David has a problem with Bathsheba and gets rebuked by Nathan. David's child dies. Solomon is born. Amnon and Tamar, this is the start of Absalom having a problem anyway. They have a problem, and Absalom murders Amnon. Absalom flees. Absalom returns. Absalom's conspiracy. David flees. David and Ziba, this is when Ziba lies to him. Absalom enters Jerusalem. Hushai saves David. Absalom is killed. David's grief over Absalom. David returns to Jerusalem. David pardons his enemies. Mephibosheth pardoned. David avenges the Gibeonites, and David spares Mephibosheth. There, I said it all. Now, all these things are going on in David's life. Can you imagine that? And yet he still remembered his friend Mephibosheth. Okay, he remembered, I've got a friend, and I need to take care of him. He's crippled his feet, he can't work. I'm going to have to take care of him and help him. All right? Now, Kenneth left for some reason, but the point is that him having a problem with his feet last week just reminded me that, you know, there was a guy in the Bible that had a problem with his feet. So my question to you is, do you have any friends from years ago that you haven't talked to in years that maybe you should talk to again? I know you younger ones are thinking, well, years ago. Well, maybe months ago, maybe last week, I don't know. Anyway. But there are many of us that have friends, and some of us still communicate with them. When's the last time you communicated the truth with them? And I'm just as guilty as everybody else. And I know Erica has found people to talk to for years. Just people just come up to her for some reason. And it's because she's a true believer and she does what's supposed to. But how many of those have you talked to about the truth? You see, that's the thing. We need to, as the lesson said, as the lesson in the adult class said, we need to be doers of the word. We need to go out and talk to people. We need to continue to communicate and tell people what they need to hear. Now, what if they don't like it? Well, Andrea, she left too, but she sent me a text or a video of a woman that is talking about, I'm not sure what she's talking about, but anyway, she was supposed to be a Christian woman that was talking to people about, you know, you didn't come here, there's no promise that you're going to have a rose garden, basically. But you still need to speak the truth. People are going to hate you, they're going to despise you. They did Jesus, they did Paul, they did all the apostles. And they have for years, people. But we need to speak the truth, we need to tell people. And I don't mean go up and grab them and say, you need to listen to me, I've got the truth. No. You need to go up and very gently say, you know, when's the last time you read the Bible? When's the last time, you know, you studied things out? Because I'm here to help you if you want me to. But you have to open the door for them. Let's have hymn number 241 in closing. Hymn number 241, we stand as we sing our main stage of prayer following. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the many blessings you give to each of us. We pray that we might be able to share these blessings with other people. We might be able to tell other people, friends of the past or friends of the future, that you are there. You and your Son are there for us. All we need to do is seek Jesus out and learn about you. Father, we pray that you would help us to rightly divide your word of truth always and carry it with us in our hearts. And help us to be part of the kingdom that your Son will establish on the earth. That be your will. In Jesus' name, amen.